If you would have asked me 5 years ago what the on-trend brewing thing would be in 2021, I would have guessed something with the letters I, P, and A. And I would have been wrong. Laugh all you want, but hard seltzer is here to stay. And Imperial Yeast's new seasonal strain W04 Paramount can help brewers get the most out of their water fermentations. A clean and aggressive fermenter, Paramount will produce an excellent seltzer with low fusel alcohols, plus it's gluten-free. If you tried making seltzer with standard ale or lager strains, you know the struggle, and Imperial Yeast is here to help with W04 Paramount. Learn more about this novel strain at imperialyeast.com and pick up your W04 Paramount before it's too late. One stereotype of the modern craft brewer is that they love to push the envelope, which, considering the bevy of new styles introduced over the last decade, appears a likely accurate characterization. Well, back in the 1990s, long before the terms pastry and milkshake were associated with beer, brewers seeking to please the palates of American hopheads began experimenting with making beer that packed a more potent punch than was standard in IPA at the time. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to talk about the ever-popular style known as Double IPA is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
Double IPA, it's such an American thing in a lot of ways, where we always think of like American versions of other styles, and it's always like a little more hops and a little more alcohol.
Right.
And DIPA certainly fits that bill. And it's, it just goes to show, like, as far as like the craft beer revolution, at least in America, goes, hops have always been a part of it. Like, there's always been a role for hops in terms of like us trying to push the envelope, but also just like what's selling to people. So it's crazy to like look back at this, learn some things I didn't know, but it's not just all, NIPA is this new revolution in IPA and it's ruining the craft market or something like that. It's like, no, hops have always been a part of it. I think that's always been something that evolves. And it's really cool to like see that history and see how it's changed and even influenced like some of the NIPA and stuff where we're at today.
Absolutely. Well, over the last few years, at least based on what I hear from listeners and readers of Brewlosophy, I seem to have developed this reputation of sorts as someone who doesn't like IPA that really could not be further from the truth. I actually rather enjoy it, particularly those of the classically clear sort, I'll admit. And I've brewed a ton of the stuff, even took home a ribbon for my Little Slack IPA, the recipe of which you can find on the website. Now, it's very true that I don't brew much IPA or double IPA these days, but that's only because I have access to such great commercial examples. So I'd rather focus on making other stuff.
That's a really good point of just like how accessible good IPA is nowadays.
Yeah.
I do the same. I actually don't brew a lot of IPAs, but it's because I'm bad at it. And I've never made an IPA where I'm like, I feel really good about this, where I can make porters and pilsners and all this other stuff that I'm like, yeah, this is a great beer. But IPA I just can't do. But thankfully, like you mentioned, it's everywhere, including DIPA. Like DIPA is more and more popular, and I see it on store shelves everywhere.
Yeah, so do I. Well, about a year ago, I brewed up a batch of double IPA using methods that many would deem reprehensible. And I look forward to talking with you, Matt, about this style in general, as well as what tasters thought of that short and shoddy batch. All right, if you like what we're up to and you want us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Our guest for this month, May of 2021, is co-founder and brewmaster of San Francisco's 21st Amendment Brewing. That's Sean Sullivan. In addition to making delicious beers like Hell or High Watermelon, Blah 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 IPA, and the eponymous and delicious El Soli Mexican style lager, Sean's also a regular on the Brewing Network's The Session podcast. He has a ton of experience in brewing. He's a genuinely good guy, and I trust this is going to be an awesome session. To be a part of it, you have to become a patron at the $3 tier or higher by Friday, May 21st, 2021, which will also grant you access to all past sessions with guests like John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Dr. Tom Shellhammer, John Kimmich from The Alchemist, and many more. To check out all of the rewards you can get for helping us do what we do, head to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the gorgeous BH15 single-tier system, which comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure you mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. brewers.com. Listener Chris Haskins wrote in with a tip after hearing something we said on a recent episode. He said, I just wanted to comment on the reusing yeast episode where Andy was mentioning that large flasks are a pain to clean. I think my method works pretty well and it's super easy. First, spray in hot water to remove as much of the krausen as possible. Next, fill the flask with hot water to about the neck and put it on the stir plate. Then turn the stir plate on, add some PBW, and let it spin for a while before dumping and rinsing. I like to let the stir plate do the cleaning work.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was listening to that episode as well, and I don't necessarily share Andy's problem with it. Like, I've usually just filled it with PBW and let it sit, and it works fine. But also, like, as far as I think that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of just making sure like there's that motion that it's like it's wiping away anything there. It sounds like a great method to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. I actually don't struggle to clean my flasks too much. But a little trick that I learned when I had younger kids, when I had babies, in fact, is you can buy bottle brushes. If you've ever seen like a little bottle brush, they're cheap. You get them at Target, and that fits right down into the area where that krausen ring usually ends up, and you can just scrub that stuff right off, put some PBW in there and scrub it off, and it works great. So, but I appreciate the tip, Chris. If you have show feedback or tips, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. So a couple months ago, I got an email from a dude who said he was working in Trinidad and Tobago. He shared some information on how he homebrews there, and then he offered to send me some local commercial beers to try with my friends, one of which is called Pola, P-O-L-A, an American lager brewed by Carib Brewery Limited.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
This is very...
It does have a milky smell.
It could be tree sap.
He's out there milking a tree.
Is that how you get tree sap? Can you milk a tree? You can milk really anything, fucker. Yeah, it's actually not bad. I don't like the color of it.
Oh, no.
I can tell from the swallow sound that you make that you don't like it. You drink beer differently when you like it. When you don't like it, it's like it's like a pained second gulp. It's like,
this is pain.
Gulp. You don't like this? I don't think it's that bad.
No.
I kind of like this.
Well, that's good.
I don't know if I really like it. It's very tart and clean.
Yeah, it's not good for me.
I like it a lot.
I got like a seed in the bottom of my cup.
Yeah, you do. I like it.
Good.
It almost a little bit tastes like a sour to me. There's fruit in there, like a fruity sour. But you would like it if it's a sour, and therefore it can't be a sour because you don't like it.
Too like seltzery.
It does have some fizzy bite.
Yeah.
Some fizzy bubbly. I like it. I actually like this one. So I'm just going to give it a like. I'll give it a thumbs up. You don't like it? You give it a thumbs down?
Yeah, I give it a thumbs down.
Okay. Well, obviously, as the more learned guy, my opinion's the only one that matters. So.
Well, I'm glad Jersey enjoyed this beer, but sadly, I kind of have to side with Tim on this one. There was just something off with this beer. It had a really thick slug of yeast at the bottom of the bottle. I'm not sure if that occurred because of some contamination during the shipping process. I really don't know. And even after keeping it in my fridge for a couple of weeks and not moving it around, it maintained this really hazy appearance. I get what the guys were saying by milky. The flavor was really, it was this oddly piney with an almost like metallic note and a hint of banana, which if you're making a American lager, I just don't expect that stuff in there. I can't say for sure what it was that caused that. Also, the mouthfeel was just kind of oddly chalky, and like Jersey pointed out, the beer was kind of tart. Not a huge fan of this stuff personally.
I actually had never heard of it, so when I went to listen to this recording and saw the title of Pola beer, I spent the entire episode scratching my head like, what the hell style is this? Like, what is this? I was like listening to Jersey and Tim talk about it, trying to figure out what in the world this possibly was. And I never came to a conclusion. Like, I thought maybe it's like a weird farmhouse or like something happened. So it doesn't sound like something up my alley. Obviously, I think there are people who may enjoy it. And then, of course, I just don't know anything about the beer. Like, I don't know what to expect. So yeah. That's crazy. Like, it'd be interesting to try. And then also to see, like try it at the source and see if that is, what it tastes like, or if there was maybe something going on. I don't know.
Well, I think it's really awesome that this beer was sent to me from Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, that's amazing. And little kind of fun little side note. Most of the music for this show was given to me by my buddy named Mark Gadgetar, who has roots in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe. So that was kind of a neat thing. But real quick, when people submit beers for Jersey and Tim to review, I ask that they include a note with their information about the beers as well as their name and location. This dude printed out his original email and put it in the box with the beers, which is awesome. I really like when people do that. But unfortunately, he only sent one of the pages, and the page that he sent me cut his name off, so I can't give him credit.
No.
And I went looking through my emails. I cannot find the email. I think I must have deleted it. But Trinidad and Tobago guy, I am very, very sorry that I don't know your name. But thank you so much for sending the beer in. And I know it wasn't a winner with us overall. Jersey kind of liked it. I wasn't a huge fan, but it's always fun trying new things, especially from different areas. So very, very cool. Well, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed on the show, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we return from this break, the focus will be on Double IPA. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
There is no denying the behemoth that is India Pale Ale, aka IPA, and all of its variants. I sometimes wonder if this hoppy style's massive spike in popularity over the last couple decades was intentional, or if it just happened to strike the right chord at the right time. Either way, with drinkers clamoring for different takes on this exciting style, clever brewers began experimenting with ways to amplify its best characteristics, which ultimately led to the development of what today we refer to as Double IPA.
And as far as stories go, Double IPA has a really fun origin story. Now, whether or not it is strictly true, I'm not sure. Like, there's definitely maybe some variance within the actual narrative, but a lot of sources seem to perpetuate this idea, and it is really, really fun. So, obviously, like, our modern IPAs are pretty disconnected from what was likely brewed back when pale ales were being shipped to India, right?
Right.
So there is... and if you're interested in that history of like IPAs specifically, which we won't get into much here, but Mitch Steele's book has a really great section talking a bit about the history of IPA. Anyways, like around the 1980s is during like that reinvention of craft beer in America, late 1980s, early 1990s, IPA becomes popular. And again, whether or not that's intentional, we don't know. Maybe it did strike the right chord. But the story goes that while he was brewing for Blind Pig, Vinny Cilurzo, who is now the owner of Russian River, if you don't know, of the famous Pliny the Elder. The story is that he accidentally just added too many hops to a batch of IPA. And in order to like balance that out, increase the alcohol a bit, maybe change the malt ball a little bit, and the Double IPA was born. So just this idea that, he accidentally added too many hops and now we have Double IPA.
Yeah.
And then apparently it sells a bunch. Like I said, there might be some form of truth to that. I don't know, like, was it an accident or, what was the influence? I think those things are maybe a little bit up for debate. But what we do know for sure is that it hit the market. Double IPA becomes an answer to like the growing hophead market of craft beer drinkers.
Right.
And that's just always been a part of the it's always been a part of the history and the society and the culture in terms of the American craft revolution. IPA's been there the whole time, and we get this bigger, bolder, more not satisfying, but it meets this growing need for the double IPA, and it remains to this day. It's all over the place, and we see a ton of people brewing them, albeit a bit differently than maybe they did before.
Yeah, that is definitely the story that I heard, that it was Vinny from Russian River when he was at Blind Pig, who is credited not as inventing. I'm sure there were people brewing, high OG hoppy, pale ale
exactly
back in the day, but he kind of gets credited as being the person who spearheaded the double IPA style. And then obviously when he started Russian River Brewing Company, you've got the absolutely world renowned Pliny the Elder double IPA, which everybody wants to get their hands on if they can't, and if you can, you're drinking it all the time. So but yeah, so kudos to Vinny for his, whether it was a mess up or not. I just think it's so cool. It does make sense to me though that you've got this, I kind of like what you said earlier, this kind of American mentality of go big or go home, we can more. And eventually you got this style now that I feel like it's so rooted in American craft beer at this point that it will never go anywhere. I mean,
absolutely not.
It's everywhere you go, you have at least one double IPA on tap, and it's kind of fun, and like you said, there are so many different variants on it today, from double New England IPA to people who are still making it clear, which is rare.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I actually really, really like the style quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. It's honestly, it's not something I have all the time. And I like multi beers as a general rule. And if I can go somewhere and get that, I typically will lean into, like if I can get a Pilsner or like a brown ale. But every now and then a double IPA just, I like your phrasing there, Marshall, of like it just hits the right chord.
Yeah.
And especially if you can get a good one, they are a pleasure to drink, like with a bunch of friends on a Saturday night, and just like hang out and crack a few. So,
well, let's go through and talk a little bit about what these beers typically are. We're going to again kind of defer to the BJCP on this, but in terms of appearance, at this point in time, they can kind of look like whatever you want them to look like. I've had black double IPA. I've had a double red IPA. Obviously, there's the hazy IPA, double IPA. For the purposes of this episode, we are not talking about the kinds of double IPA that have other weird stuff in it, like fruit and lactose and all of that. Kind of the range that I'm thinking of, at least, is your standard kind of pale looking beer, but it can be hazy, it can be super clear, and that's, to me, it all kind of fits in the double IPA category now.
It really does. And especially like recently, especially with the rise in New England IPA, I do see a lot of commercial, just labeled double IPAs that are somewhat hazy. Maybe not as hazy or juice flavor, like juice looking as some NEPAs out there. I would say traditionally, like you want a pretty clear beer for a double IPA, like at least in the inception of the style. And that's actually how I definitely prefer like my straight up double IPAs. But you're definitely right. Like they're in the market, at least, we seem to have put some gray area between like the appearance in terms of New England IPA and IPA just in general. Mm-hmm. I see a lot more of the hazier double IPAs out there, but traditionally, like especially BJCP wise, we're thinking of you're looking at a clear beer. You're looking at a beer that has been not necessarily fined or filtered, though that's certainly a option, especially on the commercial side. But yeah, clarity is a hallmark of that appearance. But like you said, always a pale beer, maybe like a little, not dark, but like maybe like a really bright copper can be there. Yeah. But for the most part, you're looking at a pale clear beer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there as well. Again, I reserve room for a little bit of haze in there nowadays.
Absolutely.
Just because that's popular and that's cool. I've had some really good hazy double IPA. Unsurprisingly, aromatically, these beers are going to be very, very hop forward. And I just it's weird because now, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I think my response to this would be different. But nowadays, aromatically, it is very strongly fruit forward. Whereas 10 years ago, it was more like this blend of piney and like grapefruit rind was what I expected, and then maybe a little bit of a citrusy, like an orange type of citrusy thing as well. Man, I'll tell you, I've been drinking some double IPAs lately at breweries that are just like fruit juice, even when they're clear, even when they're not the hazy kind. These new modern hops that are around, the New World hops, the modern American IPA IPA hops, if you will, really do have the ability to impart this really juicy, fruity, like ripe fruit character that works, in my opinion, marvelously in Double IPA.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're especially, like you said, these New World hops, and we're even some of the now almost dated in a way, where like we look at like the Citra and the Amarillo, and like it's still very popular, obviously, for really good reasons.
Yeah.
But just really heavy, we see like really heavy Citra. But again, like you look at some of these older recipes, you're right, Marshall, like you saw a lot more Simcoe, a lot more like Centennial being used. And definitely now Mosaic is everywhere. I see some Galaxy, Citra, of course, Amarillo or Amarillo, whatever it is. But again, like just traditionally, like both of those are still appropriate, I think. Like the citrus, pine, stone fruit, wherever you are, what you are aiming for is a really intense hop character, like a New World or American hop character that's going to shine in both that aroma and that flavor.
Yeah.
And then probably, I personally I like IPAs with a little bit of malt character to them. That's a personal thing, and it's stylistically appropriate, but to what degree is up for debate. I prefer a little bit of malt backbone in there, but that's just me showing my hand in terms of my flavor preferences.
Yeah, you are the malt guy, yes. Malty
exactly,
Matt.
but then looking at I mean, that aroma though is going to be matched in the flavor, and really the difference there is going to be, obviously you're going to get the bitterness.
Yeah.
60 to like 120 IBUs, and I only say that as a like yardstick by which to start thinking about it. And of course, like people on their individual systems and their individual perception of IBUs are going to be a little bit different there.
Yeah.
But then again, like that clean malt sweetness is still appropriate in the flavor, which I really love.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And there are various reasons I think you need a good double IPA will have at least some malt character. Part of that is that it's hard to avoid. I mean, you're using so much grains to achieve that OG, that higher OG, that you're going to have some malt character. But there are some tricks that people use to keep the maltiness at a minimum. And you know, some people like that. It's one of the things that one of those levers that you have when making this style to mess around with. But I agree with you. I tend to like a little bit more malt character, even if it's just pale malt, you know, but just something there, a little breadiness to balance that fruity hop stuff. Mouthfeel wise, you know, you don't want any astringency, which can be a difficult thing to avoid when you're using that as much hops as that get thrown at these types of beers. So just making sure that you're using the right processes and not overdoing it. You know, I sort of still like the 8 grams per liter for dry hopping thing. And that seems to work really well in this style. And then, you know, to me, you're not going to do anything else. You can fine it, but besides that, you just want to make sure that this beer has a nice, smooth, clean mouthfeel. It comes across, in my opinion, as just this highly drinkable beer when you consider the alcohol, the ABV that they usually have.
Totally. I'm with you, and probably worth calling out that in terms of this flavor, we mentioned like the malt sweetness a little bit. You do not want like a cloying sweet beer,
right?
Like the goal here, you're aiming for a drier beer, just in terms of the balance. Like you do not want a sweet beer, like you've said, Marshall. Like people have tricks for how they balance that out as well. But like heavy caramel is not appropriate. You want like a clean malt sweetness that edges on drier versus having a sweet beer, and that's going to be in like the mouth feel too, like that as you like exhale, you're not wanting like a bunch of malt sweetness necessarily. Mouth feel is going to be reflective of that sort of drier character where you're like, it's a medium lightish body typically to medium, like you're not looking for a heavy sweet beer,
right?
And medium to medium high carbonation, again, like the carbonation playing a little bit of a role in that perception of sweetness. You're not really looking for anything that's sweet.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So let's talk a little bit about ingredients that you would use in to make a beer like this. Just real quick, kind of, I think the starting point obviously is either going to be pale malt, or I've seen quite a few recipes recently that have that are made with a good portion, if not almost all, Pilsner malt to keep that beer as pale looking as possible. And so, you know, you could use other grains as well. I know that some people still like to use carapils, in thinking that it's going to have some sort of a positive impact on foam. I've not experienced that, so I've kind of ditched carapils altogether in my own brewing. Other than that, you know, this to me, in terms of the malt bill, is going to be one of the more simple beers that you're going to make, because you don't want to overcomplicate it. And like you said, you don't want to be using things like crystal malt to amplify that caramelly flavor.
I know most of the recipes I see, if there is crystal malt, it's like a crystal 20 or 40, or a really light crystal malt and like a really reserved touch, like something really, really light. For the most part, though, it is like a lot of base malt, some dextrin malt, maybe a little bit of like Vienna sometimes I'll see.
Yeah.
But for the most part, actually, to your point, Marshall, I'll see, I've also seen a couple Pils Maris Otter blends, like a really like 80% Pils, like 15%, and not counting like some sugar or anything, but like that Maris Otter blending in just as a way to get a little bit of character in there without, again, like contributing what the Vienna or the crystal might contribute.
Yeah, no, I see that all the time as well. And I really do like the blend of just a small amount of Vienna malt with some pale malt or Pilsner malt. It adds a little bit of color, a nice orangey kind of a color to it, but it also gives it a little bit more complexity, a little bit more malt depth. And I feel like that just goes so well when you are using the amount of hops that you do in a beer like this. You need to balance the bitterness. It needs to, in my opinion, and I know people make fun of the word balance. I don't know why, but it is so imperative when making this style to have at least some bitterness there to balance all of that malt sweetness. And it really works well, in my opinion, to use hops like Chinook up front, just a little bit. I like to blend. When I've made some of my favorite double IPAs that I've made, I used a little bit of Chinook with something like Simcoe or Citra up front, just to get that kind of sharper bitterness that I perceive out of Chinook, because it goes so well. It tamps down that sharpness, kind of tamps itself down with the malt sweetness from that high OG.
I actually use Simcoe for a similar reason. Just like that pine character and like a little bit of like, I usually get like a little bit of a resinous character out of Simcoe.
Absolutely. So do I. Yeah.
And so, I actually do that for the exact same reason. A little bit in bittering, a little bit in the late editions. Usually not in the dry hop, but definitely in the late editions. And that speaks a lot to the fact that you are going to see lots of like the Cascades, the Citras, that whole gang of hops.
Yep.
My favorite actually that I've brewed really recently and was delicious was the Mac IPA, Ray's Mac IPA on the website. I know that's Magnum, Citra, Amarillo, Mosaic, and Centennial. It's real solid. It's a great beer.
It's
if you
so
haven't
good,
brewed it, it's really worth trying to brew. But that whole gang of hops, like, and as you mentioned earlier, like the New World hops, Marshall, like the Galaxies, the Mosaics, all have like a huge place here. I do like though that blending of a little bit of. I'm a huge fan of Cascade. Like it's popular for a reason.
Yep.
And the Simcoe, I really like Simcoe as a hop just in general. So I always find a place for that.
Absolutely. Well, and so you just mentioned a whole bunch of hops. I feel like you can get away with using almost anything in this style that is more fruit forward, that's notably fruity.
Right.
I'm not a fan of just pine bombs, and there are a few commercial examples out there, some popular ones that I perceive as being very, very pine forward, and they're okay. They're good. One that comes to mind, I believe it's is Torpedo from Sierra Nevada. Is that a double IPA? But it's very piney and it's good. But my preference is more for that blend of that piney, fruity thing. And that's a kind of a classic blend. I mean, that's going back quite a bit. That was a big thing when you're using hops like Centennial and Cascade and Amarillo and stuff like that. So now, one way to amplify and to boost that ABV without contributing much more malt character for those who want a very, very clean double IPA is to use some form of sugar. They're highly fermentable, almost 100% fermentable. Sucrose is a popular option. Dextrose, your bottling sugar, is another very popular option. And again, that's not going to contribute much in the way of flavor at all. It will lead to, or it should, ostensibly lead to a somewhat thinner body, a less full mouthfeel, and still give you that ABV boost that you're looking for.
Exactly. And once you've done that, you've got a little bit of thinner body, you've got that alcohol, you use a really clean, neutral, like high attenuating strain of yeast, and you get that FG down. You want to make sure like that you're not left with a sweet beer or like a thicker body, and you're left with the double IPA, which is just fantastic. I don't know your yeast preferences at all, Marshall. I really like Scottish ale yeast for a lot of my beers, because if you ferment it a little cooler, it's really clean. I don't use tons of Chico these days. I do know Flagship is fantastic as a yeast for this. So is a House. That Imperial's House is really good.
Yeah, I've become a real big fan for my hoppy beers of using popular English strains. My favorite one is what Imperial yeast is. It goes by A09 Pub. I believe it's the Fuller strain. And I got the idea after listening to an interview with Matt Brynildson from Firestone Walker say that they use basically a variant of the fuller strain for all their hoppy beers. And I'm telling you, they're one of my favorite breweries of all time. And so mashing a little bit lower and then so that you can, you drive that beta amylase activity and make a more fermentable wort, and then pitching a yeast like AO9 Pub, I love what it does. And it leaves, for whatever reason, I tend to perceive those beers as having the perfect mouthfeel. It's kind of this creamy mouthfeel. It really holds up the hops, the fruity side of the hop character. Whatever esters, are created during the fermentation process, I just feel go really well with that hop character. And so that's probably my favorite. Obviously, there's Flagship. House is another one. House is the Whitbread dry strain. Yep. I believe that's where it was sourced from. And that is very clean one. I believe I heard a rumor that Stone uses a version of the Whitbread dry for most of their hoppy beers. So if you're into that flavor, if you like Stone's beers, you might want to consider trying something like that. But anything that's going to ferment out generally clean, I think it has a place in double IPA.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And you started to touch a little bit on some of these other things that we might do in order to make like a good double IPA. And of course, like just water chemistry is huge in the IPA talks.
Yep.
And we're going to follow that sort of same rule where it is typically like the 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride ratio is what I see most often. So like a 120 ppm to 150 ppm sulfate to like 60 to 75 ppm chloride.
Yeah.
Just sulfate traditionally being associated with like a cleaner, maybe a little bit lighter bodied and perceived as less sweet than a beer that's, compared to one with a higher amount of chloride in it. When you're looking at like starting these recipes, that's usually what I would lean into is that 2-to-1 ratio in terms of sulfate to chloride. And I've had pretty great experiences with that and done some post fermentation adjustments with chloride before. And I think anecdotally it makes a difference, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong.
Well, I'm with you. I'm for clear standard American double IPA, higher sulfate. Absolutely. Yeah. You want to amplify that hop character, which is associated with higher sulfate levels. Now, if you're making a hazy double IPA, I know a lot of people who are favoring chloride because they want that kind of warmer, creamy. I don't know if sweet is the right word, but it does seem to amplify that kind of malt sweetness in it. That pairs really well with fruity, more fruit forward modern hop varieties. Kind of makes it perceptibly more juicy, really. So that's something you want to consider depending on the style of double IPA you're making. In terms of other methods, when you're mashing, this is a fairly standard type of mash. You're going to go 60 to 90 minutes. Again, very, very standard. You're going to boil it for 60 minutes. And in terms of adding your kettle hop additions, I know a lot of people, especially with the hazy stuff, but are kind of skipping most of the kettle hop additions until very, very end of the boil, if not, just flame out only. So you cut the flame and then you add a bunch of hops. You will get isomerization from doing that, but you're able to kind of keep it more tamed, if you will.
I also do see quite a bit of, in terms of like that taming, people doing a hop stand, like quickly chilling to around like 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 77 C, and then adding those late addition hops and letting them steep for like 20 minutes.
Right.
So like going really low, you're not getting a lot of that bitterness out of it, if at all. You will get some, obviously. And then having just like those characters seep into the wort a little bit before continuing to chill and then do it. There's all kinds of methods. I've actually usually done flame outs. Just because I'm lazy, I guess. Like I don't want to do the chill to 170 and then I'll wait more. I'll just chill it. But I have had some great beers that I know use hop stands.
Yeah. No, me too. I've actually, because of one of the questions I get all the time is, how have the experiments influenced your brewing? What have you changed? One of the things that I've changed is not doing hop stands anymore. I remember the late, Mike Tasty McDole, commenting one time, I forget where, that on the home brewing scale, even if you're going up to like 15-gallon batches, right, that a hop stand is equivalent to a, say, 5 to 20 minute kettle edition, because you're getting away with it. And we kind of took that from the commercial brewing world where they're unable to chill their wort as fast as we can, or their wort just doesn't chill as fast on its own because of the sheer volume of it. And so that's kind of the way I look at it now is if I were to do, if I were a commercial brewer and I were looking at doing, say, a 20-minute hop stand at flame out without pre-chilling the wort, then I would look at doing maybe a 15 to 20 minute kettle edition instead, so I could skip the whole hop stand period. But yes, it is a very commonly used method for this style of beer.
I do just want to say, just because you mentioned tasty, I know there are some places out there still selling his brown ale kit, and those things are funding cancer research.
Yes.
Highly recommended just to look into if you're looking for a brown ale, you got a little bit of spare cash. It's a really wonderful cause, and supporting just obviously a legacy in brewing and home brewing for sure.
Yeah, particularly as it pertains to hoppy IPA and stuff,
Yes. Oh God, I know. Anyways, like you mentioned, Marshall, like otherwise it's pretty standard. Like there's a standard boil. I would usually not boil any longer than 60 minutes.
Right.
Probably even if I was using Pilsner malt, to be honest, because it's fine. And then quickly chilling. And fermenting with that clean yeast, like we mentioned earlier, fermenting maybe even a little lower on the temperature side, just like try to get that done. And purely anecdotally, and I don't know what you do here, Marshall, but I like to bump up the fermentation temperature of basically all of my beers around like day 5 or so.
Sure, yeah.
Just to try to see if I can get a little bit of lower FG, make sure that, the yeast has been able to do its job. As like a standard in my brewing, I like to have the lowest FG I can.
Yeah.
So that's one of the tips and tricks is like, especially when we're thinking about having like this really, you've got a lot of like dextrose in there or sucrose, having like a pretty high OG beer. And if you are fermenting it a little cooler, it doesn't hurt you to just bump up that temperature a little bit towards the end to make sure that everything is at the floor.
Yeah, and speaking of attenuation, this is a double IPA is a high OG wort, which can also be read as a very stressful environment for yeast. So it's very, very common. In fact, highly recommended to prop up your starter, a yeast starter prior to pitching. Make sure that it's viable. Make sure that it's vital, and pitch a proper amount of yeast. You want to do everything you can to contribute to those yeast doing the job you expect them to do, fermenting cleanly, not producing any off flavors. So that's another very popular and highly recommended approach when brewing double IPA. As far as fermentation goes, I'm a 66 Fahrenheit or 19 C guy when it comes to almost all of my ales, and that doesn't change here. And I think more importantly, during the fermentation time, we've got to discuss dry hopping, because you can't make a double IPA without dry hopping it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Like almost every example I see is dry hopped in some capacity, and kind of like the NEPA. Cold side oxidation is still your enemy here, especially in regards to like this aggressive hop usage. So it does get a bit tricky in terms of like how you specifically do it. And I've seen some really cool things out there, like the no oxygen dry hoppers that are getting sold for some of these systems are pretty interesting. But definitely just being careful with that cold side. Do what you can to try to reduce it. But as far as that goes, I do see quite a few people just dry hopping at the tail end of fermentation, which is what I do. When I do have like a couple points to go, I can maybe just purge a little bit of that oxygen still, like it'll get consumed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just always dry hop. And you mentioned sort of the ratio that you like to use.
Yeah, Dr. Tom Shellhammer out of Oregon State did all that research on what we term the dry hop saturation point. And what he found was that there seems to be diminishing returns as you get past that 8 grams per liter mark. And so you can determine that based on whatever your batch size is, 8 grams per liter in the dry hop. That's not to say that you can't use more and get a little bit more hop character, but again, diminishing returns takes into account value and cost and all that kind of stuff. So, but that's, again, do what you want. I know there are people out there making New England IPA with far more than that, double that, 16 grams per liter and whatnot. And they're making good beer. So you do what works best for you. Another method that you see a lot with double IPA in particular is the double dry hopping. In fact, on some
I was about to ask you about that actually.
Yeah, on some bottles they advertise it like it's a marketing thing, DDH, double dry hopped. I'm not so sure it contributes anything extra to the beer. Our own experimentation doesn't seem to support it. But again, if you want to add some maybe at high Kreuzen, kind of going for that hazy IPA thing, maybe the potential for biotransformation, and then add some more towards the end of fermentation. That is another option. I've always done the end of fermentation thing when making this style double IPA, again, not the hazy kind. And because in my, again, you want some points left so that you can hopefully scrub any oxygen introduced, so that you can reduce that cold side oxidation.
Absolutely. I think that's a great call out. And I actually do think in terms of like some of the commercial examples we see out there, we mentioned obviously earlier, like Pliny the Elder. I think they advertise a double dry hop on some of their cans. Like they do a double dry hop Pliny the Elder. And I've seen that recently, which would be really good, but it is kind of That said, like Pliny the Elder is the champion of the style at the moment.
Yeah.
I personally have only had it once, and I remember really enjoying it. But it's less accessible than it is for me than it is to you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We they just started distributing here in Russian River. I don't know if it was because of COVID or because they opened up the new brewery in Windsor, but yeah, I have access to 2-week-old Pliny the Elder now. It's pretty awesome.
It's a deal.
Yeah. But again, for this style, if you are making a typical kind of traditional double IPA, you expect it to be relatively clear, if not bright. And so any number of findings work. I know people will say, oh, you find a beer, you filter it, you're pulling out that hop character. Yet again, we have not been able to support that claim with our own experimentation. People cannot tell apart beers that have been fined or filtered from those that have been. And I think that's awesome. So if you like clear beer, go ahead and fine or filter it. If not, skip that step. That's okay. In this day and age, nobody seems to care about what beer looks like, so we're good. And then it's packaging, carbonation, serving it. I again, when this goes for any big beer in my experience, that you really have to pump the carbonation into it if you are force carbonating for that carbonation to be perceptible. And I think it has to do with the body, the higher that higher OG wort, that higher ABV beer. And so I do the burst carbonation thing with everything, but on this one I might do like 50 psi for 12 to 15 hours, and then I drop it down to like 14 psi and just let it roll there.
Yeah, I end up actually like spunding my IPAs typically, or my double IPAs, just because like my system is set up to spund, just because I'm using Pinlocks as fermenters, and I just worry a lot about like the cold side oxidation portion of it, and I end up spunding. So, and it is because like then you get like that, making sure you get that carbonation, because same experience, Marshall, especially like in some barley wines I've done and some imperial stouts, it is really tough to like make sure that you're getting the right level of carbonation there, because otherwise you do end up with like a kind of syrupy beer, which you don't want. That higher carbonation certainly helps like the perception of mouthfeel and the perception of sweetness for sure.
Without question. I'm with you on that. And just another note, in the packaging process, this is one of, for some, I'm still not entirely certain what the issue is with hoppy beers, but these are at high risk of cold side oxidation, and that will ruin, in my opinion, that absolutely will ruin a double IPA. So you just want to make sure to mind your cold side oxygen exposure, doing closed transfers, using a balloon filled with CO2, during your cold crashing. All of that kind of stuff is gonna pay off in the end with a good double IPA. Now, what do we look for on a personal level in a good example of a double IPA? Again, preference is subjective. But one of my favorite experiences when I get a double IPA, again, I prefer the West Coast clear style, but this sort of goes for the hazy New England stuff as well. When I take that beer and I put my hand on it and I can smell the hops from 2 feet away, I know it's already on the right path to goodness for me. And then as I pull it closer to my face, it smells like I'm walking through a hop field in Yakima during harvest. That is 100% my favorite experience with double IPA. And I've just got to say, yesterday, this weekend is the 8th anniversary at House of Pendragon Brewing Company here in Fresno. So I stopped by to support my friends, and they brewed a double IPA just to celebrate this event called King Arthur. It may very well be in my top 3 best double IPAs I've ever had. It literally smelled like I was rubbing cones at Harvest in Yakima. Oh my God, so good. If you ever get the chance to try King Arthur, I don't know how long it'll be around, but my goodness, it's good.
I actually had a similar experience because things are starting to open up back here a little bit more in Illinois. With vaccinations and having just warmer weather for sure, and there is a brewery that is now a local brewery. They opened a second location on a much larger brewery here in Huntley, Illinois, and they're called Moore Brewing Company. They're really, really great and great food if you haven't been there. But they make a DIPA called Two Trees, which is so solid, and it's exactly talking about preference. It's what I want in a double IPA. It is clear. It has like a nice head still. As a style, it does have like some of that fruit character, like that grapefruit, that nice thing, but it also has, like I've mentioned before, some of that resinous, piney character to it as well.
Yeah.
A little bit of alcohol warmth, especially like on the nose, and I really enjoy that beer.
It sounds good.
It is. I'll send you some sometime. It's Two Trees by Moore, and they are real solid.
Yeah, rad. So if you're in the Chicago area, man, you got to go check out Moore Brewing
Absolutely.
as well. It sounds rad. Well, it'd been a while since I brewed a double IPA, so last year I decided to give it a go and designed a recipe where a number of corners were cut. How did it turn out? Results when we're back from this break. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Over the years, I've brewed a bunch of double IPA, all using standard methods, your kind of traditional approach, your extended mash rest, your 60-minute boil. Well, I was recently curious if I could make a tasty version using short and shoddy approach. And that's exactly what I did. I brewed up a double IPA. I designed it as a full volume brew in a bag batch. That's my standard approach now anyways, which, just as a side note, full volume brew in a bag with a style like double IPA, you better be doing some shoulder exercises if you're removing your bag without assistance. It's a lot of grain. So for this one, I started at 3:49 p.m. in the afternoon. It was one really nice, I believe it was November Monday afternoon. I collected the full volume of water that was run through an RV filter. Again, my standard process, and then I added an unmeasured amount of gypsum to accentuate the hop bitterness and flavor. My hunch is that it was probably 8 to 10 grams, which just based off of my water profile, I think gets me right around that 120 to 150 ppm of sulfate. I didn't add any calcium chloride whatsoever, and my house water here, my tap water, when it's filtered, has very low chloride in it anyway. So this was a very highly sulfated water profile. And I really wanted it to amplify that crisp mouthfeel, bring out that bitterness, that hop character. That's just my jam for this style. The grain bill on this one consisted of 88% Pilsner malt, and that was it, except I added 12% table sugar as well. This was I had a whole recipe designed. I shot it to the crew, and I believe it was Jake and Ray came back and were like, dude, this is short and shoddy. Do something way more fun than that. Just use Pilsner malt and table sugar. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm easily influenced. But what would you expect, from such a simple grain bill like that?
I know, exactly. I mean, you're looking at a really, really clear palette. Like, I would expect maybe some cracker character just from the Pilsner malt, maybe like a little bit of, I get some white grape sometimes.
Yeah,
from like just Pilsner. Because honestly, like when you're talking Pilsner and table sugar, like you're starting down the path to a good Belgian Golden Strong Ale.
That's what it felt like. Yeah.
That's what you're looking at. And not to knock it, I love Belgian Golden Strong Ale, but definitely it is a little atypical as far as it goes. But absolutely, I mean, especially in the short and shoddy series, like that's one of the fun things about it is just where are the places we can maybe cut a corner and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's a fun one, like just Pilsner, because you are giving yourself a pretty clean plate for those hops to really shine, which is really nice. You only have to hope they have the malt backbone to back it up.
That was it, right? That was my concern because Belgian Golden Strong, this was not going to be based on the
Right,
hopping rate.
exactly.
But I think what Jake and Ray and the other guys were after was see if you can't just basically make hop juice, right? And so you've got this. You're using the malt essentially to create alcohol, and then you're going to add so much hops to it. Let's see what comes out of it then. So I was excited about it. So when the water was to strike temperature, I dropped the bag of grains into it. I just milled the grains right into the brew bag, and then I stirred to incorporate before checking to ensure I hit my target mash temperature of 152 degrees Fahrenheit or 67 degrees Celsius. I didn't go lower than that because of how simple this grain bill was and the fact that there was 12% table sugar, highly fermentable. I did not want this thing to be at like 1.000 SG. So that's the reason for that. I left the mash alone for just 30 minutes, so I cut my typical mash length in half, after which I removed the bag and gave it a good squeeze until I reached my pre-boil volume. And then just as the wort was reaching a boil, I added the table sugar, stirred that in to ensure it was fully dissolved, and then I boiled it for just 25 minutes with the following hop additions. I added 25 grams of Citra at a first wort hop. Now, the way that I do that when I'm doing brew in a bag is I have a pulley that I hoist the bag out of the kettle with. And so as it's dripping, as I'm squeezing that bag, I'll just throw those first wort hops in and start heating up the wort. I feel like that's a fair way to do it. So I did that, 25 grams of Citra, and then 40 grams each of Amarillo, Centennial, and Citra at 10 minutes left in the boil. So after 15 minutes of boiling, I tossed those hops in. Now, mind you, that's 120 grams right there.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
That's quite a bit of hops, yeah. And still 10 minutes left in the boil. I'm a classic double IPA guy, so I wanted to get some of that bitterness. I wanted to get a little bit of that mid-boil hop character, whatever that may be, flavor, aroma. And then again, I did the same exact hop additions at 1 minute left in the boil, so 40 grams each of Amarillo, Centennial, and Citra. That 1 minute hop addition for me is sort of an emulation, a homebrew version emulation of a Whirlpool hop addition, and because it takes me about 7 to 10 minutes to chill, and so those hops are still in contact with the wort then. And that altogether, that comes to 265 grams or about 9¼ ounces of kettle hops alone. So that is quite a bit. That's over half a pound of hops.
I mean, how much did you lose it all, or did you plan for, just like, especially just talking about this, did you plan for like any loss to Trub?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, part of the short and shoddy thing is that I wouldn't say that I'm flippant about it, but if I'm only able to get, 4.5 gallons into the fermenter, I'm okay with that. I mean,
that's
whatever.
fair.
But I'm really more concerned about being able to lift that brew bag out of the kettle. It's so heavy. I mean,
it's a good point.
Yeah, that was another reason, to be honest, that I was happy to use some sugar, because it meant I didn't have to use as much Pilsner malt. And I believe this recipe was like 14 pounds of Pilsner malt plus the table sugar. And so that was the case there. Just another note, the Citra and Centennial were both from the 2016 crop year. So these were pretty old hops, about 4 years old at the time. They'd been stored in my freezer. They were not vacuum sealed, but again, they were stored in my freezer. And according to the folks in Yakima during hop harvest, that's the most important thing. You want to keep them cold, out of the light, and then do your best to keep them not exposed to oxygen. So I believe the Amarillo was from the 2019 crop year, so much more fresh. So when the boil was complete, I chilled the wort to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees C with my immersion chiller, and then because I didn't filter the kettle hops, I did prop up the front of the kettle to let that Trub settle towards the back of the kettle, because I didn't want to lose that much wort, right?
Sure.
And then I let it sit for about, 5 minutes, and then I transferred it over to my Spike Flex Plus fermenter. And I do believe I got probably about 4.75 gallons in total out of the kettle, which I was perfectly happy with.
Yeah, of course.
A refractometer reading at this point showed that the wort was at my target of 1072 OG, which puts me at, and this just shocked me, 66% efficiency, which is money in my experience, given the abbreviated mash length.
For sure.
Yeah,
that is pretty solid.
Yeah. Usually I'm getting somewhere. I mean, when I first started the short and shoddy thing, I was doing 20-minute mash rests and I'd get like 52% brew house efficiency. And then I started to kind of creep it up until I hit 30 minutes. And from there, the hit that I've seen is only has mostly to do with OG. So it's kind of this linear thing. The higher the OG, the lower the efficiency. Yeah. I'm assuming that it has to do with the fact that I use sugar. And
right.
because that is a very predictable thing. You know,
you had dedicated gravity points that you knew were coming.
Exactly. And so that kind of helped make up for the higher OG issue that I have because it wasn't all malt. And so that was a cool thing. Well, at this point, I did pitch just a single pouch of Imperial Yeast A01 House. That's that Whitbread dry strain. And I didn't make a starter. I didn't do a vitality starter even. I just plopped that. It was a relatively fresh pouch of yeast, probably about a month old, but I just poured that right into this 1072 OG wort, which I know will make a lot of people cringe because they think that that's the main thing you got to do to make good beer. And I didn't do it here, short and shoddy. Gotta love it. And then I placed the filled fermenter that was already had the yeast in it in my chamber, which was controlled to 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19C. And then I attached my CO2 capture device. Now, this was during the cooler season, and so my fridge didn't even kick on. Or the fermentation chamber that I was using at the time, I don't even think it kicked on to hold that beer at 66F. It just kind of maintained it on its own. So at this point, it was 5:53 p.m. for a total brew day time, double IPA brew day time of 2 hours and 4 minutes.
Not bad. I'd take that any time of day.
Exactly. Well, fermentation was kicking off the following morning, and after 4 days total, I added the dry hop charge, which included 55 grams of Centennial, 55 grams of Citra, and 50 grams of Amarillo. I would have done 55 there, but I ran out. So they got 50 of Amarillo, which is probably one of my favorite IPA hops, actually. After another 3 days, I took a hydrometer measurement showing that the beer finished at a very respectable 1009 FG for a 8.4% ABV. Pretty solid in my book.
Not bad. Like 1009 is, especially for that style and that OG, I would be pretty happy with that as well.
Again, I'm going to say that had to do a bit with the fact that I used table sugar. It's
table sugar. Absolutely. But I mean, you're getting into that with the style. That's just the way that is to a degree. Exactly. If you could be a little lower, fine. But I mean, that's actually one of the perks of using that sugar for it. And I've actually used some sugar in Imperial Stout before, which is also like, it's blasphemy in a lot of ways. But I was doing brew in a bag at the time. So you just do what you can with what you have.
Yeah.
And it works fine.
Yeah.
Like it works out.
Yeah. It's free alcohol.
Yeah.
So at this point, I cold crashed the beer to 33 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree C, and I left it alone overnight before finding it with gelatin. Yes, I find it with gelatin. And then a week later, I let it sit in the cold with that gelatin for an entire week, really hoping that it would clear the beer up. So after that week, I pressure transferred the beer to a naturally purged keg, which was placed in my Keyser and burst carbonated overnight before I reduced the gas to serving pressure. I then let the beer condition in my Keyser for just 6 days before I began serving it to tasters for evaluation. I believe this was early 2020. It may have been January or February. And so we just were able to get in there before the whole COVID thing hit, which I'm excited about. But in terms of appearance, I was a little bit bummed. Great color. It was nice and light, more yellowy than it was orangey. But it maintained this kind of permanent haze. It was not murky. It didn't look like mud. It didn't look like a New England IPA, but it did have a pretty noticeable haze to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that partly, I think that's part of the hops. Also, of course, like I know that just as like the style in terms of like the clarity that you got, it is just also your system, the practices you follow, anything like that. But like you mentioned earlier, Marshall, like that, especially personally, like that can just be acceptable.
Yeah.
A little bit of haze. If you want that clarity and like similar to I do, there are steps you can take in terms of like getting it. But honestly, at the end of the day, if it tastes good, like looks good to you and all that, who cares?
Yeah, I agree with you. I've mentioned before that for some reason, my short and shoddy beers often end up being hazier than my beers brewed using normal methods. Even when I find with gelatin, I can't be certain what's causing this, but I do wonder if it has something to do with the reduced mash length, perhaps like some additional polyphenols remaining in solution. I really don't know, but it's just something that I've observed over 50 short and shoddy batches so far, or reduced mash length batches. Either way, the beer looked pretty good. I'm not complaining. I wish it was clear, but it wasn't. So in my opinion, before we get to the blind taster results, I felt like this beer was a very unique example of double IPA. To me, it tasted like, I think what Jake and Ray kind of wanted it to taste like, probably like alcoholic hop juice. There was really no malt backbone. It wasn't boozy. It wasn't warm. You know, and I do believe that had to do with the fact that it was fresh yeast and that fermentation temperature never got too warm. But the malt character was just kind of absent. And I'm like you, I kind of prefer to have something there. I liked the beer. I didn't dump it or anything like that. But in a future batch, if I were to do this same recipe, the only thing I would change malt wise would be I'd probably add a dose, maybe some Vienna malt. I'd probably reduce that table sugar a bit. I still think there's a place for the table sugar because, again, you get that alcohol without contributing more body and more malt flavor. But just a touch of Vienna malt, maybe even a tiny amount of a kind of a graham crackery Munich malt like Metolius from Mecha Grade would work well. But I don't want to overdo that. I have made double IPA with 100% Maris Otter, and that works really well too.
Agreed. I really like Maris Otter character. I think the last one I actually did, it was like a little bit of Maris Otter blended into the pale. I really like the character Maris Otter brings to it. But personally, like I would still lean away from like the C60s of the world and like those darker crystal malts. But I really do enjoy it's not necessary, obviously, but I would pick an example as better if it did have a little more malt backbone to it.
Yeah, this wouldn't have been your jam.
It sounds like.
It was interesting though, and that's the thing is that I would never have made this if it weren't for this series that we're doing on the short and shoddy thing. It would never have crossed my mind to use just Pilsner malt and sugar. So I'm glad I did it. I feel like I learned something. But what did tasters think? So I was able to serve this one to 16 blind tasters. They were made aware of the style before I served it to them. They didn't know that it was short and shoddy though. They were blind to the methods that I used to do this. The first question we ask is we ask them to rate kind of the average characteristics in terms of malty, in terms of hops, and in terms of attenuation or yeast character. So in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters seemed to perceive the strongest characteristics as being the beer's hoppiness, which yielded an average rating of about 3.6 out of 5. We give them a 5-point scale, and 5 would mean that it's uber hoppy. Right behind that was how dry the beer was. Again, not surprising. I actually agree with this. The average rating there was about 3.3 out of 5. And as expected, malty came in the lowest with a rating of about 2 out of 5. That is right on with my experience. So
interesting. I'm actually pretty interested that like there was a perception of sweetness in it for sure. Like that's not something I would super anticipate.
Yeah. I don't know if it would be sweetness as much as it is that kind of hint, that subtle hint of like Pilsner malt crackeriness. It may have been what they picked up. I don't know. But it was the hoppiness stole the show as it was intended to do. So there was that.
Yes.
Now breaking down those characteristics in terms of hop character, 4 out of the 16 people rated melon hop character as being the strongest, as being the most perceptible to them. 3 each ranked fruity and earthy. 2 people felt it was pine resinous, and then 1 person each rated spicy, floral, berry, and dank caddy. Nobody perceived onion and garlic, which is great because I'm not a fan of that at all. But 4 out of 6 melon, that was not what I detected at all. I do wonder, you mentioned kind of like a white grape skin type of thing from high Pilsner malt. I wonder if that didn't contribute to this kind of unique melony thing that some people seem to perceive.
That's interesting. It definitely could. And especially like when you think about other stone fruits from like those hops, I could definitely see how that might play a role for sure. It is definitely not what I would expect from like the hops you listed out, but absolutely, I guess it could make some sense.
I mean, the fact that there's such a blend to me says that we there's so many hops in there. You have Amaryllis, Centennial, Citra. Some people are going to perceive things differently. So that's what this says to me. I did also wonder if it wasn't some impact of the fact that those hops were from 2016 crop year. Yeah. There's no certain way for me to know. I have used 3 to 4 year old Citra hops in a smash beer once, and it tasted like Citra hops. So I'm not convinced that's it, but who knows? In terms of malt character, 11 out of 16 people rated cracker bread crust as the top, most perceived malt character. That's what I would have given it as well. 1 person thought it was toasty. 4 people rated caramel sweet. Again, I have to believe that it was the sweetness from the higher alcohol. There is a perceptible sweetness as alcohol increases, because this thing was not caramelly at all.
Yeah, caramel is definitely not something you would anticipate being in there, especially from like if this was maybe like a more Munich blend, or like if there was like a bunch of Vienna, like I could see maybe someone picking up on, especially that toast note when someone said that, like that makes me think of some Munich or Vienna.
Yeah.
But just from a pure Pilsner base, it definitely, you're absolutely right. Like maybe caramel is just like the closest association that we have that we can think of. But it doesn't seem like something I would anticipate for sure. And also your final gravity was not high.
No.
So like thinking about that in terms of like the sweetness, like not a lot of residual sugars. So I'm interested in that one for sure.
Yeah, it was curious at the very least. But again, most people did rate cracker bread crust. That's where I fell, full stop. I mean, that's what I got out of it. So in terms of yeast character, 9 out of 16, so just over half felt that the yeast character was clean. 3 each said esters and sulfur, which is so weird because I'm really sensitive to sulfur, and I did not get that farty sulfur thing out of this one in the aroma. But, again, maybe there are people out there who are more sensitive to me and they picked it up. So one person put phenolic, and I have a feeling that one actually didn't surprise me too much. My hunch would be that whoever put spicy is also the one, I guess I could go look at the data, but is also the one who put phenolic. There was you blend certain hops together in a very non-malty beer, and I can get how you might get kind of an odd spicy thing from those hops.
I actually know some people who associate alcohol heat with a phenolic character.
Interesting.
And so that could be, which, again, like they are traditionally separate things. I just know people who like think of them in the same way. And so definitely that may have played a role. Like just like maybe they got a little bit of alcohol heat and didn't expect to.
Sure.
But definitely, like you said, like those combination of hops could definitely play a role. Good to hear that it was mostly clean, just in terms of like a little over half of the participants. That's what you're going for.
Right.
The phenolic though, that estery, I can kind of see, like, especially if you did get some of that white grape character from the Pilsner.
Yeah.
Like getting some of that little, like, fruitier sort of stick. But again, it just, I think you mentioned earlier, it just goes to show like perception is all over the place. And especially the sample size. I'm not too surprised that there were some outliers, but it sounds like for the most part, clean came across, which is good.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, to me, knowing how the beer was brewed, I mean, it was the fermentation character was very clean. And in it, as much as we're talking about this yeast character and that person who noted phenolic, nobody noted any off flavors in this beer. And I would agree. There was nothing unexpected based on, all the crazy corners that I cut. That's becoming the norm, but no off flavors, no diacetyl, no DMS, nothing like that. So one of my favorite questions that we ask is how well does this example represent, what you know of this style? How well does it, and they still don't know that it's short and shoddy. 3 out of the 16 participants thought it was a spot on example of double IPA and rated it a 5 out of 5. And I promise I don't take these surveys, so one of them wasn't me. 6 more gave it a 4 out of 5. So all right there, you've got 9 people out of 16 who think that this is a surprisingly spot on example of a double IPA. 4 additional people felt it was about a 3 out of 5, and then 2 rated it a 2 out of 5. Nobody gave it a 1 or a 0. So at the very lowest rating, people were like, it's an interesting double IPA, but it's not exactly what I would expect from the style. That actually makes sense to me. If I were to rate it, I'd probably go in that 2 to 3 range, just because it's not a Pliny. It's not that King Arthur. Yeah. It was a very interesting, unique version of a double IPA, but it did not match what I expect.
That is totally fair. I think that's a good. I think that's a good like summation of how that came across to you for sure, and definitely the range for double IPA is just so wide, especially now. So I'm not too surprised to like hear that, but absolutely, it sounds like it was still solid and like kind of on track for an IPA.
Yeah, I was pleased with it. So the final question we ask is just how much do you like this beer? Rate it on 0 to 5 scale. 3 out of 16 gave it a 5 out of 5. There were some tasters who were drinking this going, dude, I need more. I want more. And that's what I mean. Is like
it's what you want to hear.
I mean, it's what I want to hear, even though it's not my favorite beer, right? And we are our own worst critics. I get that, but this really did not. It was hop water, is what it tasted like to me.
Yeah.
But 3 out of 16 people again loved the beer. 8 gave it a 4 out of 5. So 8 people are like, this beer is good. It's not my favorite, but it's close. And that just blew my mind. 2 more people rated it a 3 out of 5. 2 people gave it a 2 out of 5. 1 person rated it a 1 out of 5. Not a fan. But nobody gave it a 0. 0 out of 5.
Yeah, very good. I mean, that it sounds like an enjoyable beer. And like, even though you said like maybe not exactly what you want from your double IPAs, sounded like it was still like fairly drinkable, like a nice beer to have around for sure. It is a cool experiment you got to do, like especially like with the Short and Shoddy series, is like you got to walk away from that with the experience of it, knowing a little bit more, and you didn't also burn too much. Like it doesn't have to be your favorite beer in the world. Like you learned things from it and you got some experience, which is kind of great.
Yeah. You know, one of the fun things about Short and Shoddy batches for me is that I get to have a little fun. I get to experiment a bit with these ideas that I've had or be influenced by other people. And that's exactly why I chose to brew this beer the way that I did and to go to kind of yield to Jake and Ray's request to do just Pilsner malt and sugar. While I wouldn't say it was a mistake, you know, the beer wasn't my favorite beer out there. But again, I feel like I got some value out of experimenting like that. I just prefer a more complex double IPA in terms of that malt character. It was no Pliny, it was no Double Jack, but still, I'd call this one a win. It was quite good. And again, those folks who enjoyed it, they got to drink pint after pint because I'm not going to drink 8.5% beer all day long.
Right.
Well, we've got some reader comments about this Short and Shoddy double IPA that we're going to get to. The first one comes from a person called Royger. I would have considered using a different base malt like Golden Promise or Maris Otter for this one. Pilsner is, in my opinion, too light-bodied to be used as the single malt of a double IPA.
Yeah, I mean, and I agreed. Like, traditionally speaking, I'm with you. And we've kind of talked about that a little bit, though Golden Promise is also pretty light in terms of those base malts.
Yeah.
But just in character wise, so that would be an interesting one to try this with as well. Blending in Maris Otter. I think you're right, just from like a traditional perspective, but it was, again, like kind of Marshall, you got the opportunity to talk about why you went about this approach. And I think it was cool to learn about it and just like see from it. But if you were to do this again, like do a Short and Shoddy double IPA on your own, I would probably do the same. I would also use like a base of probably pale ale and like blend in some Maris Otter.
Absolutely. I'm with you, Royger. The Pilsner, I don't think, was the issue. It was the absence of other more characterful malts plus that
fair.
12% sugar. And that to me is what contributed to the kind of the blandness, that kind of absence of malt character. I'm with you. I'm still a huge fan of Maris Otter as the base for double IPA, and that's likely what I'll do in the future. So next comment comes from Michael. He says, do you ever get clogged liquid posts when dry hopping loosely? Michael, I absolutely have gotten clogged liquid posts out of my keg, but that's only when I don't make an effort to leave as much hop particulate in the fermentation vessel as possible when I'm kegging. I have a feeling that's what you're talking about, Michael, is clogged liquid posts in the keg. I don't dry hop in the keg. I know a lot of people do. If I were going to do that, I would probably use one of those stainless mesh hop filters.
Yeah, I have some experience with those, which is what I do use when I know I mentioned that I dry hop at the end of fermentation and I spun, just because I do ferment in pin locks. If I did not use either a bag or the stainless steel hop filter, I would more than likely have a clogged dip tube, 100%. So definitely I use those stainless steel filters all the time. Even in the boil, actually, I do have like larger ones that I put in there. And I have great experience with them. I love those.
Yep, that'd be my approach as well. I have not gotten a clogged post or any clogs at all since minding, where those hops are going to go and their levels. Yeah. Another clog issue that I know some people have is if they have a valve on the bottom of their fermentation vessel and you dry hop loose. Yes, I've clogged those as well. And so if I know I'm going to be dry hopping a ton, I won't dry hop loose. I'll put them in those stainless mesh filters. And that really does solve the problem as well. So next comment comes from Jim Fisher. He says, every Pliny the Elder I've done is darker than the real thing. The real thing looks like a Pilsner. I prefer my clones to be the real thing, but I do wonder if the real thing uses 100% Pilsner.
I don't believe so. From like my loose like reading of that style. Like I know Pliny the Elder did release It released its recipe out. I think it was either earlier this year or a couple of years ago. But I am fairly sure that they just typically have some two-row, some dextrin malt, a really light crystal malt. Now, I don't know what pale like two-row they're using. Like that variety might come into play there, especially as you see it darker. Oxidation can always play a little bit of a role in like making things appear a little darker. I don't think they're 100% Pilsner, but there are absolutely like opportunities to make a lighter one. Like try to blend in some Pilsner to your pale malt, and then pay attention to that cold side and see if it does leave you with a not as dark beer. That would be where my gut goes. But Marshall, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I got two thoughts on this one. first off, I've had a lot of fresh Pliny the Elder from Russian River. I've had it at the brewery. I have it at my house. And when I go grab fresh bottles, it doesn't look like a Pilsner to me. It does have kind of a copper hue to it. So I'm not sure what Jim's saying there. If yours is dark and it's too dark and it has kind of a grayish purple darkness, that would be cold side oxidation or an indication of cold side oxidation in my book, and it really does have this darkening effect. And so that is one possible explanation. That being said, like you said, Matt, if you're liking the beers that you're making and you just want them to look paler, consider if you're not using sugar, swap out some of your grains for some sugar to lighten that up a little bit. Go with a Pilsner malt. Use lighter malts. Don't use as many character malts, and I think you'll accomplish what you're looking for there, Jim. Final comment comes from Jason Gillespie. He says, "Man, I need to rethink my pitching practices. I would have had anxiety in putting a single pouch in a 1072 OG beer with no starter."
Yeah, I mean, it gives me anxiety just hearing about the fact that you did it, Marshall. And I mean, given that I've done quite a few of the pitching rate experiments, I still do starters and vitality starters, just as both insurance and just as like trying to think about best practices. But especially, I would wager like there was a lot of like just sugar in that batch.
Yeah.
So not everything was as complex, maybe as like a maltose and all of the that structure in terms of sugars. But also, I mean, when you're pitching healthy yeast, and yeast is healthy or healthier than it has been in the past, and also I know like Imperial has quite a bit more cells. I honestly am not too surprised that this ended up okay.
Yeah.
I would still probably do a starter, but that is just me. I'm not wildly surprised that this one ended up being where it was, because the gravity was high, but not terribly high, and it was like a lot of simple sugar.
Yeah. I'd be lying if I said that I don't get a little bit anxious when pitching these short and shoddy batches. It still goes against everything, in my brewing soul to not make a starter. But what I have found is that, like you said, with the higher pitch rates that you get from Imperial and the freshness that we were able to get from them, it does not seem to be an issue. And it worked out in this case quite well. There was no, fermentation related off flavors that anybody, myself included, detected. So it worked out. It's okay. I understand your anxiety, Jason, but it worked. So give it a shot if you're pinched for time. Well, Matt, I think that about covers double IPA. Anything else before we finish up?
No, I think you nailed it on this one, Marshall. I'm glad to see like that the process went as well as it did for you, that you learned something from the short and shoddy. I always learn something from listening to the short and shoddy batches, so I loved going through this as well. But absolutely not. I just love that we got some double IPA love, and it's making me feel like I might head to a brewery for lunch in a little bit here.
Hell yeah, man. Well, please remember to subscribe to our new podcast, The Brew Lab, so you're notified when new episodes drop. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy double IPA. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go